Welcome to another episode of the Above the Business podcast. My name is Bradley Hammond, your host. On today's episode, we have Jim Schleckser. He's the CEO and founder of the CEO Project, best-selling author and podcast host himself. He also wrote an awesome book called Great CEOs Are Lazy. I mean, first of all, it's a heck of a title. And I think he even had his podcast at the beginning called the Lazy CEO podcast. And obviously they've rebranded it for that. But from a book perspective, it's a really great title to say, what does that mean? Great CEOs are lazy. The first thing that I thought about before I actually interviewed Jim is just the walking that Steve Jobs used to do around the Apple campus. And I was wondering if, is that what it actually means? And I think about the most important thing I think you can do as a business owner is actually spend time thinking, having the discipline of thinking about the business. And I think that you're going to pick up a lot of different things of the lazy CEO concept in this interview with Jim on focused efforts and intentionality, effective and efficient delegation in the business, et cetera. So I think if you're wanting to grow your small business going into 2025, this episode is really going to help you. I really enjoyed connecting with Jim. I was actually able to jump on his podcast as well. So I think you're going to get a ton out of this episode. Without further ado, here's my interview with Jim Schleckser. We're good on that. That's beautiful. Where's the doctor? Tell me about that before we get rolling.
I have a doctorate of business administration. I got it from University of Maryland. During COVID, after I'd done all the puzzles and cleaned all the closets, I'm like, what am I going to do with my time? And so I'd always wondered if I could complete a doctorate or not, if I had what it took. So I got involved in that. And then COVID went and ended on me. For 2 years or 18 months or so, I did it sort of post-COVID. But I finished up end of last year, got my doctorate.
So do people refer to you often, your clients refer to you as Jim or Dr. Jim, or how do they?
Only when they're busting my chops, man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it's Jim. I don't do a thing. I do this just, that's technically the title, but I don't.
Well, okay. I want to make sure I didn't
turns
say
out you don't have to
sure.
be, you don't have to be that smart to get a doctorate. It turns out.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to make sure if it's like Dr.
No,
Jim.
no. Well,
Okay.
people call me that sometimes. It's fine. I don't.
Jim
is just fine.
You could totally play on that. That you could totally play off of that a little bit.
Dr. Phil, Dr. Jim.
Yeah, you totally could. You could. No doubt about it. Yeah. Anyway, you even said a DJ before.
Well, but that was designated Jim, not Dr. Jim. But yeah, change it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a playoff of both of those.
So yeah, that's fun.
All right. I'll record my intro and outro afterwards. Okay. Just so you know. All right. And that helps because then I can record the intro applicably to within the series. Cool.
Love it.
All right. Here we go. Jim, welcome to the Above the Business podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bradley.
Excited to have you. And really enjoyed being on your podcast, the CEO Project. I'm curious, why don't you kind of take people back on your journey? So we always start with kind of around background and origin story, bring us to present day, but also let people know kind of around your podcast and what you guys do.
Yeah. So just picking on the podcast for the second, during COVID, everybody, they were at home, didn't know what to do. So I started Java with Jim on Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock. And people I had like 60, 70 people showing up, and we're just talking about business and ideas. And it was great. And as COVID started coming off, the attendance went down and down and down and down. People were busy. They could get out and about and do stuff. So we turned it into a podcast at that point, and that was called the Lazy CEO Podcast. And that's based on my first book, which is called Great CEOs Are Lazy. So we kind of riffed off of that. And we basically post weekly. Still Thursdays at 10 is when we record normally. All kinds of guests. Sometimes I speak, but it's really designed to provide tools and techniques and ideas for people trying to grow their business for small, medium companies. And then we got to 100, and I had been hearing some noise from our listeners. They said, lazy CEO, I don't know if that's what I aspire to be. So we flipped it over to CEO Project Podcast, which is the name of the company. And it kind of makes sense. It's like you're working on yourself as a CEO. All CEOs are projects. We can always learn. And that's the spirit, of what we're trying to bring to the table. And ideas to help people on their journey in that way. So that's been the podcast, which has been great. I enjoy it, and met some really interesting people. So it's a lot of fun. It's the new
Yeah.
radio, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, at the time we're recording this, we're coming off of the election, regardless of people's political affiliation. You can't deny that the podcasting, like with Rogan and Trump going on, and like the impact of that those have had comparatively to traditional media sources. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, you think about it, people are spending 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, an hour with you in their ears while working out, gardening, doing whatever the case may be, driving to and from work. I mean, that's intimate time. And obviously I wanted to have you on. I was fortunate enough to go on your podcast, and I don't know, at the time of this recording, we've probably done 40 or 50 this year. And I just connected with you in a sense of like, Jim really knows what he's talking about in business. And, no offense to some of the other people, but they're maybe not as up to speed with just general business,
Yeah.
certainly as you are. Now, take people back on your own journey in business, okay, and kind of bring us to present day. And then we're going to do a deep dive, obviously, as this part of a series around leadership. And we're going to get into kind of a subcategory of that today. But before we get into that, take people back.
Sure. So I was weird as a kid and read a huge amount. And I actually read Think and Grow Rich when I was like 12 or 13.
Wow.
And I said, man, this is really interesting. And it got me thinking about running a business, as my goal in life, as something I'd want to do. And I've always said, I really, even then, it struck me that life is really, really short, and you want to maximize while you're here, meaning have a positive impact on the planet while you're here. Because if you're here and you leave and nobody noticed, like, geez, that was kind of a life wasted. But if you made a difference in some way, that's interesting. So my way was through business. Ended up getting an engineering degree to get myself started. My dad was an engineer. That was influential in that choice, as you might imagine. Then went into engineering. I'm a terrible engineer. But I started an MBA very quickly, and I'm a much better business person than I am an engineer. So I kind of went over to sales and marketing, and literally at 29 years old, started running companies. I ran my first company at 29, made a bajillion mistakes. I mean, I was just horrible, probably. I hesitate to even look back at some of the decisions I made because they were
Yeah.
probably so bad. Ended up leaving that firm, jumped over and ran another company, grew that a bunch, ended up with a cluster of companies through M&A, did business all over the planet. I've been in 62 countries now. And sold that to an English parent company. We ultimately decided to sell that and a bunch of other companies to GE. They pulled me out, and I did business M&A for a while, and then moved down to Maryland, where I live now, to run a company we acquired at 11:59 of the telecom bubble, for a little over $1.5 billion. And I ran that company for a number of years before I exited. And I got fired, I'll be clear, sort of occupational hazard at that level. And that's when I started the CEO project for a whole bunch of reasons, personal and professional. And that has been the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. I love what I do. It's intellectually stimulating. I get to have incredible impact on people and the people that work for them. It's financials work out great. Yeah, I really should write a thank you note to the guy who fired me, because it was literally one of the best things that ever happened in my life. So that sort of brings you to the present day.
Oh, I love that. Tell me the genesis around, and then this will kind of dovetail nicely into kind of our topic du jour today, which is really going to be around leadership effectiveness, delegation, and leverage. Um, but tell me the genesis behind Great CEOs Are Lazy, which is certainly a super catchy title of a book.
Yeah, thanks. It's designed to sort of make you stop, right? And that book sold right around 100,000 copies now, which is kind of a big deal for a business book. Most business books don't sell more than a few thousand. A good one sells 8 or 10,000. So we're up in some fairly thin air on that book. It goes all the way back to literally when I was an engineer, and a book came out by a guy named Eli Goldratt. Eli Goldratt was an
Yep.
Israeli physicist who wrote a book called The Goal. And he had this sort of general systems theory called theory of constraints, which he applied to a manufacturing operation. And you can imagine a manufacturing operation with multiple machines that sort of touch the product. that one of those machines, if you're pushing capacity, is going to limit the throughput of the entire plant. In other words, the painting cell is at full capacity. Everywhere else we've got capacity, we don't in painting. And so therefore, the painting process controls the output of the entire plant. So his idea was, when that's happening, figure out where that point of constraint is, open it up, and you increase the capacity of the plant. In other words, for a very focused, limited amount of work, you get this massive improvement in the overall business. Well, it turns out that that idea is applicable to almost any system you can name. Everything from a garden hose that has a kink in it, we need to go find the kink and open it up to get the water out the end, to your business generally, not manufacturing, any business. So every business you can name has a point of constraint that limits its ability to grow revenue, make profit, serve clients, depends on the objective you have. Even nonprofits, by the way, we're going to try to feed a certain number of people. There's a point of constraint that's stopping you from doing that. It might be fundraising, it might be logistics, it might be people, you never know. Flash forward, as I was working on the CEO project, I started interviewing CEOs. And the really good CEOs were working normal numbers of hours, 50, 55, sometimes 60, but 50 to 60. And because it's not a 40-hour-a-week job, let's agree that. And they would say, well, I'd say, well, where do you focus your time? I said, well, right now I'm really focused on sales processes because they're not delivering the results I want. And so I'm spending a lot of time in sales processes. If I came back 3 months later and say, what are you working on? They go, sales has kind of busted that open. Now we got an operations problem. So I'm spending a lot of time on supply chain trying to help get that opened up for capacity so we can handle all the orders we've got. And then the next one might be, what are you working on now? He goes, well, recruiting. I just don't have enough people to work on the orders that I now have materials for that. And so they didn't say it, but what they're doing is they're going to the point of constraint and they're spending time on it. 30, 40% of their time on the point of constraint and kind of ignoring everything else or minimize everything else. And that's unusual because less good CEOs do what we call they peanut butter their time across the business. So think about smearing peanut butter across a piece of toast, nice and even. Everybody gets a little bit of my time. And all that does is ensures that you're never going to get anything interesting done. The really good ones are willing to maldistribute their time to get a great result. And so it's sort of a combination of a theory that I learned a long time ago. When I was interviewing these CEOs, this light bulb came on. I go, oh my gosh, they're not saying it, but they're using Goldrat's theory. And so that was the genesis of the book, is let me be explicit. Hey, y'all, you're using a theory that's been around for a really long time to drive your work. And I can make this explicit so it can be recreated and other people can learn how to do it.
Well, first of all, peanut buttering their time. That is awesome. I love that.
Isn't that a good little phrase? Yeah.
I'm totally stealing that one, and I will give you credit for that one. That is awesome. That
Just
was great. That is
send me
such
a nickel every time you say it. We'll be good.
that is there's something about the imagery of that and the relatability to that where I'm like, wow, that is absolutely a really good mental model, right, to get into. Okay. Looking back reflectively yourself, since you've held a lot of leadership and CEO positions, can you reflect back on the times that you had the most success and be able to point to and say, yeah, I was, without knowing it, I was doing exactly that, contrasted with the times that you struggled and you were peanut buttering your time in your own experience, not just in the experience that you've witnessed with others?
Yeah, I can. When I ran, it was an instrumentation and controls business in Boston area. I had a really good team. We were very focused on growing the business, and we were pretty clear on where the point of constraint is. And we spent large amounts of time on the points of constraint, whether it's product development to drive revenue or acquisition of technologies we needed that would actually open up, the clients we could serve in our particular domain. And we made a lot of progress on both revenue and profitability, which is ultimately why the business was acquired by this English company, because we really owned that part of the market in a very big way. So great team, really focused, worked hard. Contrast that when I was in my last company I was at, I was more telecom software oriented, and it just had a lot of overhead and time in things that didn't add a lot of value to the business, as part of the leadership team, and it inhibited my ability to improve my business the way I wanted to directly. And so the obligations of being part of a larger organization that didn't contribute to moving the needle forward on any particular element of the business was kind of on top of it. Um, yeah, I was really ineffective and I was very frustrated during that time frame. And I kept saying, look, let me just back out of these couple of meetings. I don't need to go to them. No, 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 you need to be there. Ugh, killing me, dude. So it was not my most productive period of my career because there were so many obligations that were created by leadership. And I blame the MBA programs for this. And I've got one, so I can say this, I guess. We have this concept of stakeholders, and your employees and your shareholders and your supply chain and the environment and the local community and so forth. And see, we think like, oh, geez, if I just satisfy all these interest groups, these constituencies, I'll be good, which causes us to do this peanut buttering of our time. And I was fully in that mode in that, like, I'm just touching all the bases, but not going deep enough in any of them to make an interesting result happen. So that was a frustrating and ineffective period in my career, as opposed to the other one where we were just rocking and rolling, super focused. We didn't waste time on anything that didn't make sense.
For those of you that have not read Eli's book, The Goal, I did read it, but even if you haven't, the concept, this is what I wrote down: easy to understand, hard to implement.
Amen.
Okay. Specifically, you and I typically serve a little bit different parts of the market. I'm in the 300, really small, 300,000 to 3 million range. You're probably 8 figures and above. Anyway, that said, even though those are different business sizes, the challenge is still there.
Mm-hmm.
If you are surrounded with other people with a C-suite title, okay, these are typically very well educated, depth of experience, and certainly very well compensated for that. You have a $25 million company. You have the ability to afford a $500,000, executive. A business that is doing 750 is absolutely not affording a $500,000 COO, as an example. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In either scenario, you were the one leader, sole founder, small business owner doing 2 million. Okay. And you're attempting to find the theory of the constraint in the business versus a business doing 25 million and still has a C-suite. They still have to find the exact same, the theory of constraint. How do you know that the thing that you have settled on is the actual theory of constraint? Because I think it's Keith Cunningham says, there's nothing worse than working on the problem that isn't. Okay. Like, oh, this is what it is. Let's just go about and put all of our time and resources to this thing, only to realize, oh, wait a minute, that was actually not the problem at all. It was actually this over here. We just wasted 6 months and all this money. Thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, a perfect solution to an irrelevant problem, right?
Yeah,
A nightmare. um, maybe one way to think about that is the question you ask yourself: why am I working on $50 an hour problems when there are $1,000 an hour or $10,000 an hour problems that I could be solving? That's really the question. And so it's really about economic impact on the business. And one of the questions I'll ask is, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about your business, it would make a massive difference in the business. What is the one thing? And some CEOs get it. They go, man, if I could just figure out a way to add clients at twice the rate that I add them right now, I can handle the capacity. I've got the people, I've got the I can't add clients fast enough. You go, okay, what would happen if you could double the rate of client acquisition? Well, geez, I'd grow, $1 million a year if that happened. All right, is there anything else that you could do that could add $1 million a year to your business? Geez, no, there's nothing that looked that big. Okay, we may have our point of constraint then. Let's go figure out how to double the rate of client acquisition. What do we have to do to bust that one open? What's funny is it's like, you ever see those guys that have spinning plates on sticks on a stage and they get
Yeah.
one? Well, once you get one spinning, another one starts to wobble, right? And
Mm,
I got to go spin that one. And I don't mean like kind of the frenetic activity, but once I open up a point of constraint, what happens is the point of constraint moves. It never goes away. It just goes somewhere else. And so our job is to then figure out, where did it move to and what do I need to do to bust that one open, right? So for example, I open up the sales faucet and it really starts to come. And now I got a recruiting problem on my hands. I just can't get the people I need to do the work. So that's what I mean by it might move from one, or now I figure out I don't have enough capital to fund the receivables for all these brand new clients I've got, right? Because growth consumes cash. So now I got a cash problem that I created by solving my growth problem. So that's my point. There's always a point of constraint. It's not like we're going to work ourselves out of a job here. There's always a point of constraint. And so highest economic use, that is usually a really good place. The other thing to think about is where errors are being introduced into the business. Like,
mm.
we used to be able to perform when we were small, and now we're struggling to perform, whether it's on time or on quality or keeping customers happy. There's a good chance there's a point of constraint in there. I'll give you a third way to think about it. If you are constantly diving down into other people's jobs as CEO, like, I'll give you an example. We had one CEO and he had a CFO. So it was a decent sized company. And he said, well, geez, every month I've got to go in and look at his numbers because he makes a lot of mistakes. And I've got to help close the books every month. And you go, huh. So you're paying for a CFO and you are also doing the CFO job.
Mm.
Just strike that you as a problem on any level. And the reality is he had the wrong person in the job, right? So as a leader,
Yep.
when we're diving in and backstopping people in their job, that's probably a talent point of constraint. And maybe you need to deal with the talent problem. So those would be a couple ways to think about highest economic use, where are problems, troubles, defects being introduced, or where am I having to dive in all the time? Those are all kind of smoke, and there might be fire as to where the point of constraint might be.
What is another way to test that the point of constraint that you've identified? And I love the thought, really did. I wrote that one down and circled that one around the point of constraint moves. I was like, okay, yeah. And that's an example of why business is so difficult,
Yeah.
just business in general, because it's a constantly moving target, right? I mean, we hear things like find out what works and do more of that. Well, it will work up until the point that it will stop working, and then you have to begin to change, which is why companies like Amazon, probably one of the better examples, was constantly innovating along the way to be able to find that point of constraint, fix that one, go to the next one, go to the next one, get the next one. But we never talk about the litany of failures that Amazon has. Devices is the easy one to think about, but they were willing to try. They were willing to try, right? So, but how? Back to my really original question is, how do you know that the one that you're working on currently, or that you have identified, or your leadership team has identified, is the right one? Do you go to your advisor, your coach, somebody outside to be able to get insight into this is the thing that I got to be working on?
Well, that question of, is there anything that could be more valuable that I might be able to work on, is certainly one, but I think we are limited by our own thinking and our own experience. And so using a CEO peer group like we build, or an advisor who has a clean set of eyeballs on your problem. And we see this all the time in CEO advisory boards, our CEO peer groups. People come in and go, all right, here's the problem. And you'll hear somebody in the group go, hey, Bradley, I think you're solving the wrong problem, man. You really should be solving this other problem first. And bang, they go, oh my gosh, you're right.
Yeah.
That's really the root cause. It's not what I'm trying to solve. It's this other thing. And if I solve that, this just goes away.
Yep.
So I think you can ask yourself questions, but I think having a fresh set of eyes, it's always easier to solve someone else's problems, right? But whether it's an advisor or a peer group or whoever, have them just pressure test your thinking. Like, here's what I
Yep.
think it is. And if you get a couple of people going, yeah, that sounds about right, then you
Mhm.
probably got the right one.
I'll use this analogy, but it's actually kind of a true story in a way. Is that so my very first job out of college sold Yellow Page ads, and of course you know that world, and that was the thing. That was way before Google, and so
Yeah.
when I graduated from Auburn, that was my very first job, and did that for a little less than a year and a half, and it was great. It was exactly what I needed. I mean, door to door sales, truly door to door sales. Got kicked out of my first two doors. I was like, what am I
Nah, love
doing?
it.
Anyway, so that was a great experience. My point is that the person I work for, they just opened a sandwich shop, okay, in close to where we live. And they spent a lot of money on the build out. I mean, a lot of money to sell $10 sandwiches. Okay.
Mhm.
And I didn't know this at the time. So I walked in, I was like, oh my gosh, hey, what are what are you doing? Is this your shop? And all this kind of things. And they just launched and he's going to be open in two more locations. And, I mean, this is probably $400,000 build out or something
Wow.
like that. Well, as I said in the intro, look, there's just a lot of things to be able to pick up in that interview with Jim. I think one of the biggest things is he and I agree so heavily on things like having high caliber peers that you're around in a community of other people, having an advisory group of people with decades of experience trying to do exactly what you do. And typically his business owners that they work with are a level a little bit above what I typically do. I typically love to and do focus on businesses in that 300,000 to 3 million. And he's more in the 5 million to even 10 million and beyond. And I think that even after the recording, we had some conversations and exchanged some notes. And I do plan to stay in touch with Jim a lot because I think that there's a lot of similarities, but then there's also very distinct differences. And even though, like, I would refer somebody that's in the $25 million range to go work with Jim, I've never been there. I've never been in the eight figures but before, and I would never express or pretend to know that what that exactly looks like. But when you get around someone like Jim, who has been there, if you're wanting to take a company from 10 million to 25 million, he knows that playbook, so to speak. So I really enjoyed that conversation with Jim. Definitely go and check out his book, Great CEOs Are Lazy. Big shout out to our podcast sponsors, Club Capital. If you want to be able to get a handle on your financials go for your small business going into 2025, book a demo call with Club.Capital. One of the best assets and biggest assets that you can have is, of course, with your team. I think I fundamentally believe that business is a team sport, and there's none better that can help you to be able to, in your recruiting efforts, to recruit A players than Autopilot Recruiting. Go to autopilotrecruiting.com and let them know that you heard about them on the Above the Business podcast. I have a number of coaches that I personally work with. And if you want specific help to be able to help grow your insurance agency, David Peterson can help you to do that. And what's unique about David's program also is he also brings team members in. I personally don't do work with employees, but David's program does that. You get the best of both worlds. So community for you to be in and for your team. So go to coachpconsulting.com and let David know that you heard about him on the Above the Business podcast. And last and certainly not least, I think the tech that you use in your business matters a ton. It's both for your team and for yourself. An affordable, flat monthly subscription fee to be able to help you to manage your word tracks and your bonus and your compensation plans. And obviously is going to sync with your corporate approved CRM, Today App Pro. Go to todayappro.com, todayappro.com. All right, everyone. Till next episode, lead well and go be great.